Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a very lovely evening last night. I have 3 points, and I'm not going to take very much of time from our keynote speaker. I can go on for some time. So I go to my lectures without notes, but I'm not going to do that. The very first thing is I had a lovely evening. I was really pleased and delighted of yesterday, but even before that, I'm really deeply honored to be here and look at all of you, old friends, scholars, new friends, and new scholars, especially young PhD students who are joining us. In early 1990, we came to the conclusion that international business as such was stagnating, and entrepreneurship was really growing. And in late 1990s, I think we just struck the flame. And I'm absolutely delighted personally to see younger people, younger scholars, new PhDs have transformed that small flame to torch, and they are carrying it. So thank you very much for all of your efforts, all of your time, and in a sense, carrying this light forward. There is a Persian say. I have learned that anything in Persian, there is a counterpart of that one in Chinese. Those are two old civilizations, and they had exchanges. And it is difficult to translate it, but it says something like this. Just about 2 weeks before the spring equinox, about 21st of March, weather starts to change. You sort of feel that there is a wind in the air, and winter is dying, and spring is coming. So the idiom says, you can tell the year from its spring. And if yesterday is an indication, I think we are for a treat. And on behalf of all of you first, and on behalf of McGill University, and definitely for myself, I want to thank practically everyone. The National University of Ireland, we just learned that this university is 170 years old. They are just about as old as McGill. We have celebrated our 175th. We are older than Canada. Canada is celebrating 150th year, but we are not as old as Montreal. We are also celebrating the 350th year in Montreal. So if you still have some time, come to Montreal. Our mayor is spending all of our tax dollars to welcome you. The streets are washed, everything is painted, flowers are everywhere, flags are waving everywhere, 220 flags. So please let me just welcome you, and thank you for being here. And lastly, I want to say, actually, each and every time that we go somewhere else, the president of the university welcomes us. On your behalf, I'd like to thank Professor Brown for welcoming us. 10 years of McGill International Entrepreneurship at McGill, I have not been able to get our president to welcome us. The best I can do, the best that McGill treats me is with the dean. So I'm privileged to be here, and on your behalf, thank you very much for all the organizers. Natasha has done a marvelous job, but I know behind the scene there are lots of other people. Natasha named them. I want to rename them: Gabriella, Rachel, Philip, Brian, and I'm quite sure there are others that I have not met or I have forgotten. So on that note, I stop and turn it back to Natasha. Thanks very much and welcome.
Thank you very much, Hamid, for that. And now I'd like to introduce you to our keynote speaker of the McGill International Entrepreneurship Conference, Professor Alistair Anderson from the Robert Gordon University, Aberdeen. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Natasha. It's a great pleasure to be here, especially talking to you so early in the morning, kicking off at 9 o'clock, trying to be inspiring. But I'm going to be talking about context. I think context is a vital element in our understanding of entrepreneurship. I think without context, we can never really understand the nature and process of entrepreneurship. And context tends to have been neglected in the literature over the years. We've concentrated on the individual entrepreneur as a promoter of entrepreneurship, a driver of entrepreneurship, and context has been neglected. It's sat in the background. And yet, when you look closely, you see that entrepreneurship itself is always this combination, a rich combination, of the entrepreneur and the circumstances they find themselves in. We see the emergence of a recognition of ecosystems, the entrepreneurial milieu. And we can see that in terms of context. So the interaction, the engagement of entrepreneurs with context, I think provides us with a lot of explanatory power. I'm a great fan of entrepreneurship. I see it as a force for renewal. Here in Ireland, the changed attitudes, the positivity that I see now that I didn't see 5 or 6 years ago. So much of that is entrepreneurially driven, this force for renewal. At the individual level, we see people empowered, made strong, enjoying the act of entrepreneuring. But I think our big challenge as academics is actually understanding entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship emerges in different ways. It varies. The very nature of entrepreneurship, innovation, almost suggests that each entrepreneurial act, each event, is almost unique. So understanding this dynamic of the entrepreneur and circumstances and the business itself is really quite complicated. But I think it's our responsibility as academics, it's our job to first know, to understand entrepreneurship, and then to tell, to share the knowledge that we acquire, not only with our students, but with practitioners themselves, and of course, with policymakers. This is critical, so that we share our understanding, and we try and encourage the right kind of policies. On Tuesday night, I was talking to Hamid and Natasha, and we were just having a blether. And we were talking about companies, several examples here in Galway, of companies that started up, good ideas, good products, but they didn't internationalise, they stayed local. But the product itself was good, the business was good, and an international large company swooped in and took over the company. And looking at that superficially, without understanding, that looks like failure. The policymakers have encouraged this kind of business, they've promoted it, they've had an incubator such as we saw last night, but the outcome seems to be that the product, the jobs, have all vanished to somewhere else in the world. But when you look more closely, when you do a much more finer-grained analysis, yes, that business is no longer established in Galway. But what's left? An entrepreneur who's been empowered with knowledge, with experience, has built a network, a pile of cash looking for a home. So what we see is that the entrepreneurial context has actually changed because of that. It's become ripe for new opportunities. And so often these entrepreneurs who've been bought out, they very few of them go and sit on a beach. They're sitting there with that money and that knowledge and enthusiasm. And they start or they help to promote a whole series of new businesses. So if we were telling policymakers what they should encourage, this superficial notion of, only pick winners who will stay here, would actually be very, very bad advice. Because the entrepreneurial process, in turn, has created new opportunities. So my argument for understanding is this fine-grained understanding of the many aspects of entrepreneurship. I think for understanding, we have to recognise that entrepreneurship is a process, that it happens over time. It's the only way to understand it. And the process is open-ended, not just open in terms of open innovation, but lots of inputs, and indeed lots of outputs. And entrepreneurship is always with others. Entrepreneurship connects people. It connects products and customers. It connects with other entrepreneurs. It engages with society and the economy as a whole. So, seeing entrepreneurship as a process of engagement, I think gives us some theoretical purchase. And that we should think about not just entrepreneurship, but the process as entrepreneuring. This activity, this action, and all the actions that are involved with it. I think international entrepreneurship offers us a unique opportunity to better understand entrepreneurship. My reasoning for this is that international entrepreneurship is at the intersection of entrepreneurship and international business. Now, we've got lots of topics: social entrepreneurship, the amalgam of social welfare and entrepreneurship. Interesting topic, fulfills an interesting role. But social entrepreneurship, if you know the literature, you know that it was characterised in the first few years and continues to be, but by this playing around of the juxtaposition of social and entrepreneurship. So we have, is it entrepreneurship with social outcomes? Are the values generated not financial but social benefits? But it's a kind of circular argument. It doesn't actually go anywhere. But if you look at international entrepreneurship, we've got two well-established disciplines, rich with theory, rich with explanatory power, the notion of international studies, and of course entrepreneurship itself. And I think this intersection, this potential, is what makes it conceptually interesting for us. And it's not just that international entrepreneurship is novel. I think it's a really exciting topic too. International entrepreneurship used to be the domain of large companies, the multinationals. That we had to see them in a particular way and understand them. But what's happening now is that international entrepreneurship is the field for small firms, these agile, nimble firms that find a niche, an opportunity, and fit into it in context. They don't need enormous amounts of capital. They don't need a huge infrastructure. Their dexterity, somebody yesterday was talking about ambidextry, their ability to fit into context and niches is exciting and so characteristically different from large multinationals. They're no longer dependent on large infrastructure. And I see international entrepreneurship at the leading edge of globalization, this phenomenon that's embracing us all. So explanatory purchase, explanatory power is perhaps key. And I think we can learn a lot from the processes of international entrepreneurship. Intersections, theoretical intersections, I think are particularly useful because things come together. They either merge or they collide, they clash. And this kind of situation becomes useful for generating new ideas. They get struck off and pushed out. The very bringing together is useful. And I think that's important because most of the work we do in a silo, a disciplinary silo. Economists don't talk to geographers. Sociologists don't talk to anybody. We have a very narrow vision of our disciplines and the explanations within our disciplines. Of course, everybody talks about interdisciplinary work as being useful in the future, but it's so difficult to do, to bring the explanatory purchase from sociology into economics. The languages are different, the mechanisms are different, and of course in terms of publishing, the outlets are so different. But if we're in this intersection, this combining and combination of international business and entrepreneurship, we're actually in a very privileged position, because behind us is the theoretical power, the explanatory power of all the entrepreneurship theory, and ahead of us is all the explanatory power of international studies. We can, even if we're looking at entrepreneurship, we still can garner some insights, some ideas, some notions of how things work from the other discipline. It's a kind of theoretical liminal space betwixt and between, neither one thing or the other, but rich in explanatory potential. The power of that, the example I've chosen, perhaps a bad one, is writing a paper for an economics journal. I've written a few. I've even had a couple accepted, but not very many. But think about how you write these things. If you imagine a paper, an academic paper, is a series of boxes. What's your research problem? What's your methodology? What's your data? There are a series of boxes that we fill in. And an economics paper, 90% of these boxes are predetermined by the discipline. We're fixed. And if you stray from that, you won't get the paper published. That's the expectation. So that means that theory in that area is equally bound by the discipline. So it is a disciplinary silo, and it's very hard to get out. International entrepreneurship, on the other hand, is this space, this liminal space, where there's the opportunity to draw on theories from different areas, to combine them, to clash them, and see which has the most explanatory power. So I think you're in a privileged position, and we should take advantage of it. The boundary spanning, the theoretical boundary spanning of international entrepreneurship will give us insights if we're fundamentally interested in entrepreneurship, or indeed if we're fundamentally interested in international business. It's normal when we're talking about a phenomenon to try and define what we're talking about. Your early days as undergraduate students, define what you're doing. Editors, reviewers will come back and say, you haven't defined your topic. But something like entrepreneurship is so hard to define. Of course we'll get definitions. We have lots of definitions. It was interesting, when I was doing some reviews for preparing this, 10 years ago, the papers on international entrepreneurship were all about providing definitions, and there was a whole range of them. But I think that's a fruitless task. The phenomenon itself is evolving, it's changing, it's dynamic in itself. So trying to contain something, restrict it in a definition, is akin to this disciplinary silo. And we want to get out of these things. But I think it is equally important that we have a conceptual definition so that we understand the nature of the phenomenon rather than the limitations of the phenomenon. At the same time, I share Nicole Cavella's concern about the overuse of born global. For a long time, it seemed as if the literature was dominated by this idea of born global. This was the new phenomenon, that these new firms, from their very inception, were global. And yes, of course it's an interesting phenomenon. It's a remarkable phenomenon. But that doesn't happen very often. Most often, what we see is a process of globalization, a process of moving out into the world. So if we get too hung up on the notion of born global, I think that can be counterproductive too. I like the term, but I think what we should do is keep it in our conceptual toolbox as a kind of ideal type, something that we can draw on as an example to compare and contrast with other forms of entrepreneurship. But for me, the most interesting part of the whole field is not just the way that these small firms cross borders, interesting in itself, remarkable, but how they manage when they get there. How do they practice entrepreneurship in these different contexts? Theoretically, international entrepreneurship, it's not just a wee sister of multinational. We can't use the theories that we use for big, strong, well-established companies to try and explain this phenomenon, any more than we can try and use the theories that apply to large business organizations to understand entrepreneurship. Small firms require a different way of theorizing. We need to recognize their qualities and their characteristics. The reason I say that is, if we look at how a large multinational would establish globalization, if it was an Irish company, the branch in let's say Boston, would take on all the characteristics of an American organization. The people at Hofstede told us how it would have national culture. So really we'd be looking at an American organization, perhaps with Irish ownership. But that's not the way of things for these small, nimble firms. They use their local context in the sense of a springboard, a platform to launch themselves elsewhere. But they don't adopt all the characteristics of the host country. So beginning to understand how they operate, how they manage, what values they generate, what practices they have in the host country is, I think, the way to begin to understand the processes. McGill Plenary said, 17 years ago, that what we often see in the small business literature as the liability of newness, novelty, lack of experience, is not a problem for these small firms. In fact, it might even be an asset. They're not burdened with the processes and procedures that have been established over time. They're nimble, they're flexible, and of course they're learning organizations in the sense of doing things. Well, thinking through, what theory should we use? Whose theory, where does this belong on the theoretical bookcase? I'm convinced international entrepreneurship is not a discipline in itself. I think it's a unique form of entrepreneurship. If we look at where good papers, by good I mean ones that carry lots of explanatory power, and probably ones that are well cited, they're published in the best entrepreneurship journals. They're seen. I argued that international entrepreneurship was the leading edge of globalization, but it could also be the leading edge of theoretical development when papers are published in journals like Journal of Business Venturing, and of course, Entrepreneurship and Regional Development. I think the key conceptual point, though, is that understanding, or trying to understand, how entrepreneurship actually operates, how it engages in these different contexts. Now, that presents me with a problem. For years, I've been arguing being embedded Firms are part of the local context. We can't understand an entrepreneur, entrepreneuring, or entrepreneurship without taking due account of context. That the local environment, the formal, the informal institutions all shape how entrepreneurship emerges, how it operates, how it's practiced. And here I'm saying, oh, here's these companies who are embedded, perhaps here in Galway, but they do business in the US, they do business in Afghanistan. Do I have to eat my words? Have I been talking nonsense? Well, perhaps I have for many years. But I think, in fact, that I'm not wrong, but I simply haven't taken sufficient account of the idea, the possibilities of different accounts. Context represent all the different dimensions of the entrepreneurial milieu. There's cultures, there's economics, there's social factors. As academics, we bracket these off, we treat them as analytically different. But context represents the embodiment of all these things. So if you do business in context, you engage with all of these things. These things shape, modify, perhaps even drive how your business operates. The net result is that a business in Dublin is going to be different from a business in Dubai. So, international entrepreneurship is operating in 2 or 10 different contexts. Surely, this gives us some explanatory purchase to see those differences, to look at the way that entrepreneurship is practiced. If entrepreneurship is a reflection of context, the institutions that represent context, seeing the differences, seeing the similarities, will in turn allow us to begin to understand the nature of entrepreneurship itself and the various processes that are involved. So I see great possibilities in this notion. Let me give you an example. 7 or 8 years ago, just outside Aberdeen, where I'm from, this gentleman here, the one with the golf club, he's called Donald Trump, wanted to build a golf course. And it seemed a good idea in some ways. The gentleman, Donald Trump, apparently, so I've heard, is no longer involved in being an entrepreneur. He's taken a job in the US of A. But nonetheless, I think this provides us with an interesting example of entrepreneurship in context. The place where Donald wanted to build his golf course was locally called the Sands of Balmeedy. It was a bit of the coastal plain and characterised, as you might imagine, by sand. Not grand sand dunes like the Sahara Desert, but lots of wee sand dunes. Very natural. It wasn't actually very suitable for building anything on. So it had historically been very much left alone. In part of it was an area of special scientific interest, largely because it was very natural. And Donald came along and said, this would make a great golf course. I'm going to transform the Sands of Balmeedy into the great dunes of Scotland. Donald will build the greatest golf course in the world. Now you can imagine the resistance. This larger-than-life American coming along and taking this treasured piece of natural Scotland and imposing his vision, his American vision on this area. So there was lots of resistance. The classic. We analysed this by looking at newspaper reports over 3 years. We captured the arguments and the ideologies that were being presented. And we saw, in general, the argument was This is our place. Who are you, Mr. Trump, to come along and make these changes? And Trump's resorts is the wrong word. Trump's overwhelming argument was, I'm spending money. I'm a successful American millionaire. You have to do what I tell you to do. An overwhelming logic of the entrepreneurial narrative. The defense, the arguments, leave our natural countryside alone. Disneyfication, imposing an American, and indeed it was a very Americanized golf course. But Trump always retorted in these economic terms. There's a classic wee story. This chap here, up at the top with the remarkable jumpers, called Colin Forbes. You'd probably call him a peasant farmer. He had a small holding. He did a bit of fishing, grew a few crops, and had a couple of sheep. Very much a man of the earth, if you like. And his small farm was where Trump wanted to build the golf course. So there was an immediate collision. Donald Trump wanted to buy his place. But because he was a successful entrepreneur, he didn't offer wee Colin lots of money. He offered him a very modest amount for his farm. And Colin, being a Scotsman, wasn't very happy with that. Perhaps if he'd offered him a couple of million, there wouldn't have been a problem. And the whole thing condensed into a David and Goliath story in the newspapers. Here, Colin, this is my farm. My family have farmed here for generations. Donald Trump, the people love what we're doing. We are spending millions of pounds. They're not even talking to each other. Trump, economic, money, spending, the American model of entrepreneurship. Colin grumbling along on the bottom, this is ours. We don't want it changed. Trump, your place is a pigsty. And it wasn't actually very nice. I'm sure you have them in Ireland. Wee farms, old rusty tractors and broken down motors lying outside. Things that could do with being fixed, but they hadn't quite got around to doing it. It's worthless, says Trump. And Trump offered him a job as a landscape gardener. A guy that's been working for himself for years, working on a golf course. I'm offering you a great job. I don't want your money. My mother named our house Paradise for good reasons. A total collision of ideas and understanding. This presentation, as I would call it, of an American model of entrepreneurship in this very local context. A fascinating story. Well, the golf course was built. It went through all sorts of inquiries, debate, but eventually the Scottish First Minister said that the economic value of this is sufficient to override local disagreement, and the golf course was built. It looks like a very nice golf course. It doesn't look like a Scottish golf course. It looks more like an American golf course. But, and this is the bit, I mean, it's probably quite nasty of me, it lost money last year. $2 million. It didn't work, or hasn't worked yet. So folk like perhaps me and certainly Colin Forbes will be sitting smirking. Trump made some local agreements. If you live in Aberdeen, you're allowed to play a round of golf for €300, and that's seen as being generous. If you go 2 miles up the road to Inch, you can have a round of golf for £20, and they'll give you a bacon roll as well. So I see this as entrepreneurship in context. Donald Trump brought his American model, which was undoubtedly successful. The guy has made a great deal of money. He's got a new job now, so I don't know quite what's happening in terms of the money. But he was extremely successful with this American model, which involved probably riding roughshod over local concerns. On the other hand, we see the context, this small Scottish context, the sands of Balmeedy, local, valued by people, even if it was just valued for walking their dogs or having a breath of fresh air. And Trump wasn't interested, wasn't concerned. He made no effort to contextualise his golf course. I suspect if a Scot or an Irish had come along and said, I want to build a golf course here, it would have been an entirely different process. The result might have been the same, the outcome in that sense, but the process would hardly have been so contentious. So my argument is that context matters. This importing, driving, delivering this American model of entrepreneurship in this Scottish regional context really was fraught with difficulties. But that's where I see the potential. How can we, as scholars, as academics, develop our understanding of entrepreneurship if it's context-bound or context-influenced? I think this is the very reason, the very rationale, the raison d'etre for you as IE scholars, because looking at how entrepreneurship is practiced in these different contexts will give us a theoretical handle. The notion of an entrepreneurial theory of practice is fairly new on the horizon. I think it's a very promising one. It's quite a difficult thing to actually envisage. But the general argument of a theory of practice of entrepreneurship is that individually, the micro of entrepreneurship is infinitely variable. People do things in their own way, and each is probably different from every other one in some modest way. But a theory of practice argues that there are structures in society, usually institutions in the north sense, formal institutions, laws, governance, informal, culture, practice, things that people do. And by looking at this, what I call engagement, how entrepreneurs operate in particular contexts, we can begin to develop a theory of practice. So we can see the influence of the economy, the influence of economic structures, and we can see too the influence of the social factors, whether entrepreneurship is seen as a good thing to do or whether it is perhaps frowned on as profit-taking. So this macro perspective in a theory of practice would take account of patterned responses. We would actually see what matters in terms of how entrepreneurship engages. In other words, the practice of entrepreneurship on a general sense. The Germans have a really good word for it, praxis, I think they call it. Now, I think that if we were able to look, to compare these practices in different international contexts, not only will we see how it's practiced, we'll see what's important, but the comparison, this boundary spanning that I alluded to earlier, will actually enable explanation and enable understanding, which, as I said earlier, I believe is our role, understanding what goes on in entrepreneurship. So I think the possibilities, indeed, not only appropriate, but a very compelling theoretical framework for understanding entrepreneurship, is looking at the differences in practices across places. In broad terms, looking at this notion of engagement, the interaction between the economy, between the society, between the institutions and entrepreneurship, will allow us to see general patterns, which is fine. But perhaps for publication, we need to do a bit more than that. There's some fine grain. For example, looking at marketing. Is marketing promoted, done, enacted, engaged in the same way in these different contexts? What sort of value? The marketing academics call it the value proposition. What's the value proposition? Is it the same? Is it different? Because so often marketing is indeed a form of engagement with potential customers. I'm always interested in the social side of entrepreneurship, so the value of relationships, not just in marketing, but in getting things done. My underlying argument is that entrepreneurship is as much a social process as an economic process. Again, this notion of engagement. So how do people use networks? Do they expand their network from their own country, or do they form new networks, new connections, new ways of collecting, gathering knowledge, or getting access to resources? All of these detailed practices, I think, are rich with explanatory. We heard yesterday on the doctoral programme about one paper, or one PhD in fact, that was going to explore the nature of opportunities. And opportunities is so often something in entrepreneurship we just read off. Of course, we have an argument, are opportunities made or are they created? But in international entrepreneurship, we have the opportunity to actually see how they are created, how they are developed. Is it the same opportunity here in Galway as it is in Berlin? Is the opportunity modified, developed, adapted, shaped? All of these, I think, give us the potential to better understand entrepreneurship. So I see a rich range of possibilities at a very general level and much more fine-grained detail that we can draw out, all of which will give us some explanatory purchase. I think by doing this, the possibilities of adopting this almost as a research framework will allow us to better understand not just international entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship in its general sense. And by doing that, I think we'll be better. We as academics will be enabled, empowered, if you like, to fulfill our academic obligations of being able to understand entrepreneurship, being able to inform not just our students, not just the practitioners, but once again policymakers in terms of encouraging the right kind of entrepreneurship. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alistair, for that powerful, dynamic and vibrant presentation. I think I'd like to invite some questions to the floor. So, any questions?
It's very early in the morning. Oh, no.
Tag.
Yeah, I have one question. I come to this area from the international marketing, international business.
Hang on, I'm very deaf, so
Do you want to stand here and I can stand?
So my approach to coming to this area is international marketing, international business, right? In which we put that context that we're saying very much, and some people come from the entrepreneurship side. So I'm used to studying ongoing concerns.
I'm preaching to the converted.
Yeah, already there. But so what would you say? When does entrepreneurship stop? I mean,
It doesn't stop.
Yeah, but how can you draw a line between
Where does it stop? My argument is about spanning the boundaries, getting out of society. Entrepreneurship's all of it. I mean, I was quite critical of social entrepreneurship earlier, but one of the things with social entrepreneurship is the way it filters it goes down to the lowest levels of society. Sometimes the structure of social entrepreneurship is much more abstract and a much higher level, but helping those at the bottom of the base of the pyramid that are excluded from society. Entrepreneurship's everywhere.
But international marketing is everywhere.
Yeah.
US market, I mean, that would be very why is it so different to really integrate these two approaches? Because they are there all over the place. So that's why I asked you, what's your opinion?
A rather hard question. I agree.
Yeah.
I am regularly criticised for doing it. But rather than looking at entrepreneurship
Yeah.
and marketing, let's look at entrepreneurial action.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurial action isn't everywhere. Well, there may be some everywhere. But the process of creating novelty, creating value, which is what I see, it's quite distinctive. Well, we can see it. I'm not saying I can define it, as I said earlier, but I think I can recognise it. And so can you. And you can see deliberate marketing rather than the outcome of marketing. So if we look at the processes, engage with those processes, that's our unit for analysis. I'm not trying to get round your question. I've been troubled by it too. It's a hard question. But I think looking at activities is the way around this.
And then trying to combine these different
Yes.
approaches.
Yes.
And say,
So if you're looking at marketing, I often have a great difficulty in differentiating marketing and entrepreneurship. Because what I see so many entrepreneurs doing is they're actually marketing.
But it's still so that those of us who come from the marketing international business side, we still publish mainly in the international marketing international business journals.
Yeah.
So there's still this kind of division between different scholars in the area.
But you try publishing a marketing paper in an entrepreneurship journal.
Yeah.
It's hard. The disciplinary silos are in the journals. So,
Ari from my London School of Business and Management. I just wanted to ask you about, I think your appeal for context is certainly resonates. Interestingly, was a theme at the Academy of International Business Conference in Dubai, interestingly, a few weeks ago, where business history was one example of saying we need to do exactly what we're saying. But I do want to ask you about your reaction to the Buga framework. And this is a framework that some people are now citing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity as a way to get a handle on context. And my question to you is, how useful is that kind of approach, given particularly the emergence of diaspora, second, third generation diaspora communities, the emergence of more women in the research community and all sorts of other ways. So in a more inclusive context, how does that kind of framework fit or not?
it sounds good. I've never tried it. Complexity worries me. When I started looking at complexity theory, well, it's just too damn complex. The difference between something being complicated and complexity, as I was told once when I was entered a paper, and it made clear, is complexity is about dynamics. So there's four processes going on: marketing, entrepreneurship, and context. These things work in conjunction with each other, and you can't sort of divide off. Let's look at the marketing and the entrepreneurship as one dynamic, because it's influenced by the other dynamics. The argument's chaos theory. You know this notion that the butterfly in Honolulu affects the rain moving along. So you need a supercomputer to calculate the effect of that. And my brain's no supercomputer. I like simplicity. But I think if we look in detail at one area, rather than this enormously complex, abstract background, if you look at the actual practices, the fine grain of what people are doing, that calls for a different methodological approach. You can't look at these things with surveys. You can't ask people to say how many, how often, yes or no, and develop any kind of understanding. But you can watch what people are doing. You can ask them why they did that, and why didn't you do that, and form this kind of understanding. So I don't think we'll ever master the complexity in its fullness. It's too much. And maybe we don't need to. If we know what people are doing, and why they're doing it, and how they're doing it, we can. That's the kind of understanding that makes sense to me. Does that?
entrepreneurship, that there are so many different and isolated groups studying the same phenomenon. And they're producing all of this material, all of these articles, and they don't seem to read each other's work. And there seems to be so much overlap. Do you see a solution to this? Tens of thousands of scholars in different silos. What's your solution?
Well, first of all,
So how can we learn more efficiently, maybe?
the theory and practice, I think we tend to see them as two different things, but they're no. Theory is simply understanding practice, and practice is in many ways the embodiment of theory. So they're not really that far apart. With a good theory, we can understand practice, and by looking at practice, we can develop better theory. But this notion of this is a good example. This is the only conference on international entrepreneurship. Yeah, I'm quite sure you'll find papers that encroach on international entrepreneurship in marketing conferences, maybe even in society. So maybe we don't talk to each other enough. We go to a conference, we read particular journals. The one's changed, we're becoming so much more focused. Somebody was commenting the other day that when they're writing a paper, when they're doing their literature review, they don't go off their backside, they sit in front of the computer screen, and I thought, oh, I do that too. But when I was a boy, when I was doing my PhD, I used to spend weeks in the library, and there was always this, often this serendipity. I'd be looking for a paper on entrepreneurship, and I'd stumble on something in sociology. Wow! There's this crossover.
Probably also you read more books also, and now we tend to use less and less books.
Yes. But because it's so easy, we put keywords into a search engine, and we see those
So is this
those
making
narrow
us
papers.
more intelligent or more stupid? What, yes to the last of the question?
Yes!
Or both?
Efficient, but not effective. I don't know the solution. I don't know. The trouble is, we're all under such pressure now to publish, to teach, that we don't really have that time to sit down and maybe reflect on our discipline in the way that we should.
Just a small comment there, if I may. You have all of these different, of course, business scholars looking at entrepreneurship. But in Sweden also we have engineers also looking at entrepreneurship. And in Sweden also there's something in between. There's something called industrial economists. And they're like, they used to be engineers, but now they're business, but they're not, so they're in the middle. And they also study entrepreneurship. And we don't talk to them either.
Okay, can I go? Is it okay to take another one? Sorry, but just to time. Can you go?
I think you said something about how marketing and entrepreneurship would intersect, especially when we came to this area with creating processes and then relationships. If I go back to Donald Trump, it's not a person of just coming into Scotland, but what to do after he has come in. And he be successful if he had managed relationships with people in Scotland who could have complemented him with his ability of foreigners, not knowing what the context at least wants. But if we learn from the others there, could he have started better? Or what do you think? Managing relationships.
I think I'm theoretically promiscuous. If I find an explanation anyway, whether it's in marketing or whether it's in plumbing, that helps me understand entrepreneurship, I'm very happy to use it. And I think we should all try and be open-minded with this. The worst case scenario, it happens with our undergraduate students, it happens with our masters, it happens with our PhDs, and it happens with papers. We write a paper, and the student writes their paper, and we pick it up and read it, and we say, so what? This is the ultimate damnation of a piece of research. So what? And we see so much of that. There's a great deal at the moment that seems to be coming from Asia, which is, they call it extending the argument. They look at a theoretical proposition, they develop it, they measure it, and they say yes, 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 we confirm it except in this particular case. So what? We've learned nothing new, nothing, no novelty, nothing that challenges. I would much rather you told me something that was completely wrong, because if I thought it was completely wrong, I would have to demonstrate why I thought you were wrong. And in doing that, I would probably learn a great deal myself. So, we have to make a difference. There's no point in doing the same as everybody else. We have to embrace the challenge of taking a chance, some novelty in what we do. And I genuinely believe this idea of context really gives us the possibilities of doing something. And some of it will be wrong. And certainly, a great deal of what I say will be wrong. But it's your job to show why I'm wrong.
Okay, and just the gentleman right, can you yes?
I'll have to go all the way back. You'll now know why I only teach small classes. Yes, sir.
Right, Mr. I enjoyed most of you.
Most of it.
Most of you. But I think your comments about the social entrepreneurship, perhaps, really strike a chord with me on that. If you see situation like, I think the two elements to that, one is that you find out that some of the entrepreneurs become very successful, Trump and Buffett and so on, and you think about Microsoft, and they come to a time that they say you make enough money now, so let's put a lot of money into some public good. And they become a philanthropist and so on, and I think from going for a good cause from that. So I think there's some element of social beast in everybody. And
I agree.
so perhaps if you have a problem in terms of saying them as a social entrepreneur, but I think what they construct is a social enterprise, and I think that is nothing something which can be contentious about. And if we do not consider that and we do not value it, then we see a lot of funding, public funding in the UK scenario going in from the public sector in the social enterprise. And you're going to kill all that if you do not recognize what good.
I think you've misunderstood what I was saying. I'm a fan of social enterprise. I'm involved in it. I just had a paper accepted in the Journal of Rural Studies and Social Entrepreneurship in Africa. And it's a classic case of how two individuals can actually make a difference. The business that sets up uses this extraordinary thing called they take people who have small shops, boutiques, which are run very badly in village areas, and they inform them, they enable them to sell high quality seeds so that local farmers can grow stuff. So I am actually a fan of social entrepreneurship. But what I was arguing about was the juxtaposition of the social and the entrepreneur. The literature on social entrepreneurship for years was this going round and round in circles and going nowhere. That was my critique. I like social entrepreneurship.
Into Scotland, he on something else.
He's from Dundee.
We might, unless someone has any more pressing questions for time, we might finish up. Alistair, your keynote really stimulated discussion, very refreshing, struck chords with many.
You think that's a compliment?
It was a very big compliment. No, it was very interesting, and it's context, and it's very much. And speaking of context, it's just an observation I have in the room. Speaking of the research context of the growing community of IE scholars, I don't know. I see there's actually 50-50 female scholars, i.e. researchers, where from back a few years ago when I started, there was there weren't as many female, i.e. researchers in the room. So I was counting there while listening, and I couldn't help notice the number of female scholars that are growing in the community. So I think we have 50-50 here. Would that be right? Would that be? Yeah. So I'm very delighted. I think we're all delighted about that. So, great. So there's one core request I have to ask you. We're going to have a group photograph straight after this session for all the delegates. If you could just go to the front of the building on the steps where you come in on this floor. So we go out, Brian, you might lead them out to the front. And then there's tea, coffee and some breakfast across in Friars. I want to say thank you so much again to Professor Alistair Anderson.